Okay, let's started now. So hi again, everybody. So welcome to the training for early years with COVID. So this is just to kind of run you through the toolkit and have a discussion about cases and how to report cases and how to get support at this time. So I'll just take you through the process. So some of you may have seen, if I just share my screen, if you don't have any of these tools, then please let me know and I can make sure that they're forwarded to you. So as you may have had, you should have the guidance on who to report to. So if you have any cases within your setting, we need these reported to the WCC reporting form stating reporting positive COVID cases to WCC, which takes you to a link and you fill in a form. So that's all pupils and for any staff. If you have any questions or queries, you can go to the early years advisors email address as a helpline. So you can go there if you have any questions or queries. You can also technically go. Some of you can get some help from the DFE helpline, but we have heard reports that the DFE helpline, which is this number up here, have actually turned away nurseries and early years settings. So just to say that is your available support, really, is around maybe them, but the early years advisors setting. So that's somewhere that you can go for any help or advice. Now, if it's other weekends that you really need some advice, between 8 and 8, you can go to dphadmin@warwickshire.gov.uk and they can provide some advice to you. So if you email that's actually a manned inbox across the weekend. I do my shifts on that, so you can go to that. And also, again, the final one is PHE on this number. This one's a bit variable, so some people get advice from this number and others aren't able to get through to get advice and guidance, but just to say that those are all your backups of places that you can go for help and advice if you have any cases on site. But ultimately, I'm hoping that this training should cover all the things that you need to know, to let anyone else into the box, everything else that you need to know to be able to sort of control any situation. So you've probably heard the terms outbreak quite a bit, and before September we had the definition that an outbreak was anyone who had symptoms suggested of COVID or any positives of COVID. So now the guidance is formally that an outbreak is any confirmed 2 cases of COVID. If anyone's if you've got, put your mute button on if you're not got a question or don't want to speak up, just to stop the background noise. So an outbreak is 2 confirmed cases in a setting. Now, there are different stages of what an outbreak is and different levels of fear that come with it. So we have, if we have 2 cases in a setting and it's quite clear that they are maybe 2 siblings or that they are clearly 2 children in the same group, then that is an outbreak because it's 2 cases, but it's quite clear that once we've isolated that initial bubble, that there aren't any further concerns for the rest of the nursery or the early year setting. If we have same situation, but it's a child in, say, a really early young baby's bubble, and then another random case in an older children's bubble, like a preschool bubble, and it's quite clear that maybe the mum works at a hospital in the preschool bubble, a similar situation whereby they already had a case in the family in the young baby bubble, and those are quite risky because we can associate it with a case and it makes sense. It's when you have maybe 2 cases in quite close contact to each other, so it suggests that there has been transmission within the setting, or you have more than 2 cases within your setting, at which point then we start to query whether there's transmission, and we step up to help you to sort of provide some extra advice and guidance. Now, if it's quite clear that they're all related, so for example, if you isolate your baby bubble and then you end up with quite a few positives in that bubble as a result, so for example, in some cases in schools, we've had the bubble go off after a positive, and then we end up with like 5 or 6 6 people test positive in that bubble. Although numbers wise, that seems quite shocking, because they're all off and they're not in the setting, we have very low level concerns about that. So just to kind of take you through, that was just to kind of take you through the stages of levels of concern when we start to deal with the word outbreak. And we've covered sort of who to report to, and then some helplines to help you with that. So the next thing in your toolkit is, what is a close contact? So you may want to start to identify who it is that need to self-isolate. So when you have your first positive, or even the second positive, you have to go through the process of who should isolate. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong one. So this is anyone who's been within a metre, which in most early year settings you find that staff and children are within their bubble, are within a metre and face to face. But if they're in a metre and face to face, it's for any length of time. If they've been coughed on, it's any scenario that's happened, and any skin to skin physical contact is automatically a close contact. You can have contact up within a metre. If you're not face to face and having a conversation, you can be within a metre for up to a minute. Because if there's things like you're handing a child a drinks carton, or you have to reach over another member of staff for a stapler, or you're within their vicinity to aid them, but you're not actually discussing anything with them, you're not breathing within their space face to face, you are sort of transiently in their space, which includes things like passing in corridors, we don't class that as a close contact until it's been up to a minute. So just to bear that in mind, that sometimes when you're looking for close contacts, you get really scared that anyone could have been a contact. We just need to isolate everybody, and you don't. You just have to isolate those who've been a direct close contact with a positive, and only when they've been within a metre face to face, or within a metre for up to a minute, which actually is time. The next level is if they've been wider than a metre but closer than 2, and you can have a conversation at that space for up to 15 minutes. And then if you share a car with anyone, you're classed as a close contact. So some staff members get quite scared about, well, we need to isolate everybody, so it includes not only the children in that bubble, but that bubble had a mix with that staff member, and that staff member was working with them, so we need to isolate everybody in that chain. You don't. You only have to isolate those who've been a direct close contact of someone who's tested positive. So if they are not a direct close contact, they're a contact of a contact, then you do not have to isolate them. It's just those who've been within a metre or within 2 metres for greater than 15 minutes or shared a car. So then is for which time period do you isolate them for? So sometimes people get quite confused of the day that you got the test results. You isolate people from that day, and that's not the date we go by. We go by the date that they became symptomatic, or if they didn't have symptoms when they tested positive. And we go for the day that happened, and for the 48 hours before, and then we go for the full 10 days in front of that. So, for example, if I tested positive on a Wednesday, didn't have any symptoms, you would enact that within your setting on the Wednesday, the Tuesday, and the Monday. So it's the full 2 days before. And if I continue to come to the setting after I tested positive, you would continue to isolate any contacts of me for the next 10 days. And as I say, if we use the test dates where there haven't been symptoms, and we use the date in which symptoms started when there have been. So if you've had any symptoms or you've tested positive, any close contacts need to isolate for 14 days. And generally the rule has been do not test unless you become unwell. And that's in here currently, but we are actually changing that guidance now in lots of our areas, whereby if anyone who's been a close contact does become unwell, we are now starting to recommend them to test, and we're giving them access to testing that way as more testing capacity is opening. So that may be something that we update soon around the do not test until you become unwell. If you haven't been a close contact, as in you haven't been within a metre, within 2 metres, you definitely stay 2 metres away, you're in a totally separate bubble, then you do not need to self-isolate. And if you have been a close contact with somebody but not within the time frame that we've just suggested, so you're with them like the previous Tuesday or something like that, then no, you don't have to. If you were with them the Tuesday the week before they tested, then no, you don't have to isolate either. So some staff members get quite confused of what the time frame is, so we've covered that. It's only those who are within the 48 hours before they develop symptoms or get tested positive, and the 10 days after. So next is around investigating a positive case. So as I've mentioned, these are the questions. So the first thing you ask someone is, when did you take the test? And you know, generally within the 5 days of that is when they may have shown some symptoms. Now, once someone's taken a test and they've tested positive, sometimes they take it on their own back that they want to go and get tested because they felt unwell in themselves. We now, if you look here on the slide, it shows you the Public Health England definition. So this shows now that when we look back retrospectively from a positive, we will use any one of these symptoms within those 5 days to define the start date of your COVID infection. So if you tested positive on a Saturday and you were taking along, say for example, you had a husband-wife, the wife works for you, the wife was dragged along by the husband on the Saturday to get a test because he was feeling unwell, and she tests positive, and she'll say to you, oh, I didn't feel unwell, but I did actually have a really bad headache on the Thursday, and I felt quite unwell with it, but I didn't class it as anything. We would use that Thursday potentially as the day on which her symptoms started. And we've had lots of issues in schools whereby the pupil has tested because a family member was unwell with the top 3 symptoms, and they will report that they had a sore throat on, say, the Thursday or the Wednesday before they tested, and we will use that for the school setting. So just to confirm again, if they tested, we take the test date. We then ask them, did you feel unwell in any period before then? And then if they do report any one of these symptoms in those 5 days before the test, then we will use that as the start date of their illness. If they can't report any, then that's fine. We just use the test date, and that's absolutely fine, and that's quite normal as well. But if they did report any of these, then we use that as the start date of the infection. And as I've just mentioned, this is a timeline. So we would take the 2 days before that they develop symptoms here, so the 2 days before when they could have been infectious, and the 10 days after. And on this chart, it also shows you that it's likely that they could have been infected at any point in those earlier days. So, for example, if a person reported a sore throat on a Tuesday and they didn't come to work Wednesday, Thursday or Friday, and then tested positive on the Saturday, we would go back to that Tuesday and identify all close contacts in the 2 days before they develop symptoms. So we would isolate anyone who's with them on that Tuesday or that Monday. And I'll go over the isolation periods shortly. If someone tested positive on the Saturday and they didn't have any symptoms, we would use that Saturday as a start date, and we would isolate everyone who was with them on the Friday and the Thursday, because that's the full 2 days before they tested positive. So hopefully that makes sense. So I'll quickly take you through isolation periods. Just bear with me 1 second. Not on this one. Okay, I'll need to reopen it. I obviously closed it in between. So isolation periods. So here's some guidance on isolation periods. So how do you calculate it? So here, if you have a contact outside of the home and they were in the last time I was in the setting was the 7th on the Wednesday, which is here. You isolate them. So if it is a Wednesday, you isolate them for 2 following Wednesdays, releasing on the Thursday. If the case, for example, just to kind of work through it, if they were on a Friday, you would isolate them for 2 following Fridays, releasing on the Saturday. So whatever date or day that you have someone the last time you was a close contact of them, you would isolate them for the 2 following days. That makes sense. So if it was on a Monday, you'd isolate them for the next following 2 Mondays, releasing on a Tuesday. If it's a Wednesday, you isolate them for the next 2 following Wednesdays, releasing on the Thursday. So that's just to kind of cover the isolation period. Some people have said to me, well, that's 15 days technically. How does that make sense? The reason being is the first day of exposure is day 0. It's not day 1. So it's not like you're going on holiday where you have 7 days and you return on the day that it happened. The first day is the exposure. You don't have any previous history of exposure at that point. It starts at day 0, and you have to have a whole day go by before you've got a whole day that's passed. So the reason being is the first day of contact is actually classed as day 0. So that's covering close contacts, dates of last contact, dates of symptoms, and the isolation period. Some of you, and it may be quite common, that you're dealing with household contacts. So you have a query of, well, mum and dad have positive, when can the child come back to the setting? So this is whereby the red colour is person 1, so that might be mum, and then blue and the green colour could be the child that's in your setting. So if mum became unwell on the Wednesday the 7th and then she withdrew her child on that day, went and got tested and she was positive, mum needs to isolate for 10 days up until the 17th. So from the 7th to the 17th, she's isolated for 10 days. The child would need to isolate for 14 days from when the first person in the household developed symptoms. And so they can return to your setting if it was a Wednesday, 2 following Wednesdays, returning on the Thursday back into your setting. We get this quite a lot about what happens if someone else in the household then develops symptoms at a later date. So you might have a couple of children in the same household. Mum became ill first, then child 1 became ill, and then child 2. And you're wondering, does the 14 days start again? The answer is no. If it's within the same 14 days, if all the cases happen within the same 14 days, then the start date is still the first person in the household who develops symptoms, and then ends when the symptoms are over. So it's the 14 days from the first person develops symptoms. I've actually had a head teacher's daughter who developed symptoms at about 10 p.m. on the night of the 14th day of isolation, and then she tested positive. And he was wondering, is that a whole new timeline? And the answer is no, it's within those 14 days. And we generally give it a bit of grace of about a day or two, that if someone develops symptoms slightly outside of that, we would still class it as the same period of time, and we wouldn't pull any siblings in to re-isolate again. But if there's a gap of about a month between someone develops symptoms and testing positive, then we would ask the whole family potentially to lock down again, to follow the isolation period again. And see, I'll just jump and look back and see if there's any questions, because no one's interrupted me yet, which either makes me scared that I'm not that interesting, or I think that maybe it's all answering everything. So that is a link we put in the briefing each week. So yes, so Sonia's saying the link to the toolkit is in the briefing each week, so you've got access to that. I think most of us have it as our sort of signature now in our emails as well. And then finally, just some information about bubbles. So obviously I know that in pretty much most early year setting, your bubbles are really tight. As you can see here, if you have one sick person and your bubbles are really tight between your groups, then it's only that one group that has to go off. So you can see here, there's, that bubble safe, and that bubble goes off to self-isolate. And then here, we're in a situation whereby we've got all the children are together. We don't know who could or could not be in a close contact of this child, and therefore everyone needs to go off. And that's one of the issues that we're having at the minute, is around how we reduce the bubble sizes. And we recommend in early year settings that you just keep them to a minimum, keep them really tight. And most times the weakness is between staff mixing, or staff after work. So, if it takes sellotaping to the floor, marking out the floors, marking out the staff rooms or any communal spaces so that people can't be within 2 meters of each other. And even as a site manager, doing audits of how people move around and, pulling people up when you can see them being within 2 meters, having a scoreboard even, at your site of those who've been good and those who are on the naughty step. It's doing some of that. If you've got any questions have gone in, please put it into them. Please put into chat. So with some new widget symbols for families. I don't know what that is a question regarding.
No, it's not a question. Sorry, it's Zoe Harwood. Just to say that in this week's briefing, there are some links to some widget symbolised communications for use with families.
Oh, brilliant! Okay,
which will help, particularly families with English as a second language, but also those maybe that struggle to read all the information. And if children are used to the widget symbols, then the parents will also be using them.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that, Zoe. So the last thing around, unless there's any questions, and like I say, I'll stop just for 5 minutes before the end to take any questions that pop up. So if you have got any, put them into the chat box. So the last one is the NHS app. So some of you might find this is your bane of your existence right now. I know I do. So there's a couple of things about the NHS app. So it works. There's 2 ways it works. One is by the code that you can scan as you go into restaurants, which you can't do right now because they're all closed. And the other one is by the Bluetooth element on your phones. So what you might find is that the app can pick up staff members who work in close proximity, or in your setting, you might find that you put them in a locker together or in a basket together. So throughout the day, I don't know if you've had this guidance already, I would suspend the Bluetooth for the work day if you do not have your phone on you. Because if anyone in your group tests positive, then all of you will get the test and trace warning to go and self-isolate, which is a massive headache for you as a setting. Also, if your lockers are by somewhere that visitors come in and can stand for any long period of time and then class themselves as a close contact, technically, to where your phones are, then if any of those visitors test positive, don't let you know, because they're great like that sometimes. They don't let people know. All your mobile phones could ping off that there's a positive and you won't know why. You won't know where it's come from. So in the work day, if you haven't got your phone on you for the full span of the day, turn off the Bluetooth element. In addition, we've got lots of families who keep getting the it ping up to say that they're a close contact. They don't know why. If you look at the timeline, it will say you have X number of days. So for example, you've got 8 days to isolate. That means that that adult has been close to another adult who's got it activated on their phone, who's now tested positive. If the isolation period is 14 days, which we know it is, then if they're on day 8, that means the exposure was 6 days prior. Does that make sense? Because you only isolate for 14 days. So if it says you've got 8 days to isolate, it means the exposure must have been 6 days prior. And so they may question to you as a setting of, do I bring my child to the nursery? How do I do that? And what you'd say is obviously the child, the parent needs to isolate for that period of time. As a private service, it's up to you whether you then allow that child as a person with the close contact to come to the setting. We would recommend that you do. In schools, we allow the child to still come. Usually it's another adult that brings them, because they're not isolating because they're infectious themselves at that point. They haven't got any symptoms. It's just the fact that the person has been told to isolate by the app, and the query is for you as a setting is if you let them to bring their child to setting. We do in the school settings, and it's up to you. And we can't see a reason at this time as why the child could not then come to the setting. But obviously you wouldn't want the parent who's self-isolating to bring them. And if you did decide that that was, in extreme circumstances where they desperately needed a childcare, they're a single parent, they're on their own and they do need to bring them, you could arrange that they drop them off before anyone else arrives or after everyone's arrived, and pick them up before everyone arrives or before as everyone leaves. But that's up to you as a setting if you're dealing with any parents that have been told to self-isolate. So that's everything as an update, and I will be running another one with further information as things progress. If you have any questions or queries, please reply to the meeting invite, which will respond to me directly, and I can update the next training with some of your questions. But Alexa, if it's just anything that you've got, so drop it into the chat box or put your hand up if you've got any questions. No? Okay. Oh, I think that all made sense. I'm hoping that was helpful. I always hate it when everyone's really, really quiet.
There's one question there, Leanne, sorry, about could you remind us, please, what those other symptoms were? You put more symptoms on, including headaches, sore throats, sickness, diarrhea. Have you got that slide, please?
Yes, so this is a slide here. So in schools, we have now sort of sent out new guidance in schools. It's not just in schools, actually, it's within your letter as well. So here's the early years parents letter. So in this, we've said that if any child is feeling unwell, not to come in, and that includes things like sore throat, muscle aches, or severe fatigue. In your document as well, you've got these for when it's in the guidance that says how to investigate a positive case, and these are some of the symptoms that you have. So on there's a normal thing like fever, which is a high temperature, loss of taste or sense of smell, and a cough. But we are also in young age seeing things around diarrhea, headaches is really common, sore throat is really common, and some people believe that the runny nose is protective, but it's still on their list of symptoms. And generally feeling unwell is also sort of a severe fatigue, feeling really unwell in themselves, really low energy. So it's the diarrhea, the headaches, really low energy, feeling really, really in themselves. Those are really common secondary symptoms, things that you may see in the younger age brackets. And we're now saying to sort of some schools throughout the area, I mean, some schools have taken it on themselves to give the guidance that, you know, they are pushing parents to get tested if they've got some lesser symptoms. But we're also just stating, you know, if you're feeling unwell, do not come to the setting. And obviously you may, as an earlier setting, have a lot more of this. So, you know, you've got children who are teething at the end of the day, which means that they're, you know, they're likely to have a runny bottom as a result of that. There are reasons why people might have some of these symptoms. So it's not blocking everybody who comes in, because if you know that they've got things like teething, then you are going to see a lot more of those symptoms. You'll see the rosy cheeks and other bits, but it's just being very wary that we are seeing a wider array of symptoms related to coronavirus. So Sonia's really kindly put that on. So yeah, the other symptoms, I just covered those, and Sonia's put that link on. And again, please do send me feedback, because it'd be good to know whether this has been useful or whether it's covering stuff that you already know. If there's anything that you are frustrated with around that I haven't covered, please let me know. Sonia, anything that you want to add in?
Just to say that all of the documents and things that Leanne has shown you this afternoon are on the toolkit. You might have to just pick your way through it. We will, in the next few weeks, be having our own tab on the website, which will make it easier for you all to find things. And just to say thank you to Leanne, really, for coming along today, because it's really important that we all hear these messages as well. So thank you, Leanne.
Great. Thank you, everybody. All right, cheers. Okay, take care. Okay, bye. Bye-bye.